The Man with the Yin-Yang Eyes. Season 3. Episode 9. After slaying the corpse with the snake's soul, I didn't have time to rest. Suddenly behind me, there was a crunching sound of the earth. As soon as I turned around, I discovered two other corpses trying to get out of the grave. Soon they were crawling out of the ground. This time facing me was a bear and a lion. The corpse with the lion's soul was the first to attack me. Looking at the clothes and the guitar it carries as a weapon, I guess this guy was a rock musician or something before he died. This corpse is not as flexible as the one with the snake's soul, but it is many times stronger in terms of strength. As soon as I saw him raise his guitar, I immediately jumped over, just in time to dodge his dangerous attack. But my opponent is not only that grumpy lion, there was also a corpse of a woman in the form of a giant bear. I just escaped from the lion. The bear charged at me. It clasped its hands together and aimed at my head, and if I didn't dodge it, my body would be ripped open by these sharp claws. Pausing for a second, I suddenly realized that I was sandwiched between two extremely dangerous opponents. Honestly, I don't want to fight with opponents like this at all. These people should be resting in peace. With the attack of two opponents, I was forced to defeat them. I suddenly came up with a plan. I stood still, waiting for my two opponents to get really close. As soon as we both hit me, I quickly crouched down. As I had expected, neither of them could keep up with my pace. Their attacks instantly hit each other's heads. Lady Bear was hit in the face by the guitar, causing the bridge of her nose to be broken in two, and the lion was not much better. His face was scratched by claws, and he lost an eye. After being hit by a powerful blow, the two staggered backward. I immediately raised my hand to form a seal, taking the opportunity that they didn't even have time to stand. Dealing with this type of opponent, only the seal is effective, and using fists only makes you lose your life faster. Before the opponent could charge at me, I quickly pushed the seal into their body. The spirits of the bear and the lion immediately escaped. Two bodies quickly fell to the ground at my feet. Right now, I'm really satisfied with myself. In the blink of an eye, it was possible to defeat two heavy and dangerous opponents with almost no effort. While I was still drowning in my satisfaction, Big D's voice rang out. "Gregory, where are you? Save me." Hearing Big D's voiceless scream, I thought that he must have encountered something extremely dangerous, so he had to ask me for help like that. I immediately ran back to the warehouse. As I ran, I blamed myself, having just defeated two opponents that I was complacent, no longer paying attention to my surroundings. As I ran, I thought that Big D had already encountered that mage while I was out here. When I got to the warehouse door and saw the scene before me, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Right now, Big D is in a cage used to keep animals. Outside is an extremely large white dog that is constantly trying to get inside to attack Big D. This tragic scene is truly a paradox where animals and humans swap places. Looking at the dog, I immediately realized it was the dog of the merchant. I didn't understand why it could chase Big D like that, so I asked, "The dealer is here, right? Where is he?" At my question, Big D suddenly snapped. "How do I know? I didn't see him. All of a sudden, the damn thing ran after me. If you don't want to get rid of it, what are you standing there for?" Just as I was about to answer Big D, a voice came from behind me. "Looking for someone, kid? Do you need a hand?" Accompanying that question was the feeling of something cold pressing against the back of my neck. I immediately recognized the merchant's voice and imagined the black muzzle of the gun in his hand. Still holding the gun to my head, the merchant shouted, "Two damn rats, are you trying to play me? It's not that easy. Now how do you want me to deal with you?" Being threatened by the merchant, I immediately explained, "Calm down, buddy, let me explain, things are not as you think. We just want to borrow your cart for a bit and then return it right away." But the merchant didn't believe what I just said. He shouted, "Do you think I'm a 3-year-old kid? I tell you, when you were a kid, I was rolling around in this land. Don't worry, I'll give you a glorious death." As soon as the merchant finished speaking, his 2 juniors immediately burst into laughter. Looking at the attitude of the merchant and his men, I knew that he would bring me and Big D back to his warehouse. Until then, it's not hard to predict whether we'll be eaten by a tiger or a lion. I immediately winked at Big D, who immediately understood. Big D immediately nodded in response as if to say that both would act at the same time. Suddenly, Big D jumped up and grabbed the bars of the cage he was hiding in. At the same time, Big D also shouted loudly and made a very scary face. The dog watching Big D was suddenly scared like that, then it was extremely scared. It took a few steps back and barked loudly. Big D's action not only surprised the dog, but the merchant also immediately looked in the direction of the cage, not understanding what Big D was going to do. Seizing the opportunity for the merchant to be distracted, I immediately took action. First, I leaned to the side to avoid the muzzle of the gun pointed at my head. The merchant seemed quite surprised by my actions, but it was too late when he understood. Fast as lightning, I used my hand to push the gun pointed at me in the other direction. The other hand immediately sent a heavenly elbow to the middle of the merchant's face. My blow was quite strong. The merchant took a few steps back and knelt on the floor. The blood from his nose did not stop flowing. He shouted, "Those scoundrels, what are you doing standing there? Quickly kill that brat for me." The 2 juniors seemed to have just woken up when they heard the words of their boss. They started charging at me. Although these 2 are much taller than me, but their level is not a match for me. Waiting for the first one to approach, I use my shorter height to avoid his punch, followed by a heavenly retaliatory strike in the center of his chest. As soon as he was hit in the middle of the chest, the merchant's junior fell to his knees. Without waiting for him to retreat, I hit my head hard, hitting his chin. The headbutt was so strong that he fell backward, but I was thrown back to the floor because of that. Seeing that, the other guy rushed at me. I had no choice but to attack his crotch. I knew my attack just now was not supposed to be used, but at that time, I had no choice. In an instant, both the merchant and his subordinates were defeated by me. The merchant had a gun in his hand now, and I guess he was thinking whether he should shoot me right here. In the end, the merchant decided that, although solving everything here would be a lot of trouble, his anger made him not care about the consequences anymore. He slowly raised the gun towards me. But just when his finger was on the trigger, there was a loud noise. The merchant looked back, only to see a noise coming from the truck. Feeling that something bad was about to happen, I took the opportunity the merchant wasn't paying attention, rushed to grab his collar, and shouted, "Tell me, what do you put in there? What animals are they?" The answer to my question was a thunderous punch, followed by the merchant's shout. "Of course, those are wild animals, but what do you think, Princess Snow White?" The merchant's punch was so strong, it made my glasses fall off. Since I don't have my glasses, as soon as I look in the direction of the truck, I could see the souls of the animals locked up in the truck rushing towards me. The noise just now was probably the sound of the beasts scrambling to find a way out before the soul was expelled. At this moment, something very surprising happened to me. The merchant also seems to be able to see the spirits of these beasts. The main proof is that he raised his gun to shoot them, which surprised me greatly. After passing through the merchant and me, the spirits of the beasts immediately headed for the door next to the warehouse and quickly disappeared. Looking at the door with my intuition, I could sense a tremendous power behind it. As for the merchant, after seeing the beasts that had been drained of their souls, he immediately changed his mind. He doesn't want to do the math with me anymore. Instead, he immediately called 2 of his juniors to quickly climb into the truck. As soon as the truck door closed, he immediately stepped on the accelerator to let the truck run without saying another word. The sound of wheels grinding against the barn floor resounded loudly, as if something frightened the merchant. He left in such a hurry that he couldn't wait for his pet dog to return. The only poor dog had to chase the truck, barking while running. After the car disappeared, I turned to stare at the door where the spirits had just disappeared. A few seconds later, the door slowly opened, and I quickly realized a man was standing behind it. The door slowly rose to reveal the face of the person behind. As soon as I saw his face, I was more surprised than when I saw the merchant shooting the souls of the beasts. That person was the silver-haired assassin, the disciple of the magician Wang Saget. But unlike before, his face now had several rather large scars. But most of all, the arrogant smile was no longer on his face. While I was still looking at Saget, Big D came out of the cage, combing his hair, and asked me, "Hey Gregory, isn't this Wang's dog? I thought you finished him off?" Also wondering about this, but one thing that interests me more is the smell coming from Big D. It's really horrible. Receiving no answer from me, Big D turned to Saget and said, "Looks like you found a new owner pretty quickly, not bad for a hound like you." Without showing any anger at Big D's words, Saget slowly approached, took off his hat and said, "You can say whatever you want, you fat bastard. I don't care what you call me, but one thing's for sure, you have a debt to pay for me. Today I will get both principal and interest back. I don't know what this Saget guy is up to, but we just met, and his way of talking reeks of gunpowder." Without warning, Saget immediately rushed towards me and Big D standing. As soon as he saw Saget rushing over, Big D yelled at me to be careful, but soon he also ran away. Seeing this action of Big D, I'm not surprised because I'm so used to it. At this moment, I discovered another thing, which is Sagat's movement speed. I have seen his speed before, but this time I am surprised. His speed is now many times faster than before. The mistake of thinking Saget was the same as before cost me. Before I could raise my fist, he rushed in front of me. Along with that was a punch like heaven. This is the second punch I got in less than 10 minutes. The punch sent my glasses to the ground once more. After receiving Sagat's full blow, my face went numb, but I turned my head to look at him, trying to suppress the pain. As soon as he looked in the direction of Saget, the pain seemed to disappear, replaced by a feeling of shock. I wonder why there are so many surprises today. What surprised me was the spirits of the animals that just got out of the truck. Now they are with Saget, or in other words, he has the power of all 3 of these animals. But what makes me wonder is that even with 3 animal spirits, he still hasn't lost consciousness like the people I've met before. At first, he raised his hand forward. Looking at the shape of the hand, I could imagine the sharp claws of an eagle. And as it is, the Saget will use the power of the eagle to attack me. This time, I was not as subjective as before, not letting Saget get close. I actively leaned over to dodge. Normally, I was confident in my speed, but I still couldn't avoid Sagat's attack this time. Immediately the shoulder of my shirt was torn, followed by sharp pain from the severed flesh. Didn't stop for a second after scratching my shoulder and running past me. Saget turned around. Now, he was about to swing his fist at me. Looking at his fist, I felt like a giant rhinoceros was rushing towards me. In the blink of an eye, Sagat's fist came in front of me. Immediately I put my hands together to catch this powerful blow. If I don't catch it in time, I will surely end up in the hospital, where the doctors operate on my face again. I felt the great power of Sagat's punch. I felt like my arm was broken in half before that punch. While not fully feeling the pain, my whole body was thrown backward. While I was being tortured by Sagat, the damn fat Big D ran to the end of the warehouse, which was far from the battle. Here Big D is sitting and smoking a cigar. But when he turned his face away and looked back, something surprised Big D. Before Big D could scream, he was hit by my body. Big D himself did not expect that he had already avoided coming here and still couldn't get out. But also, thanks to Big D, I can reduce the impact force when I fall to the ground. Me and Big D were thrown into the iron cage and wooden crate behind. As soon as I got up, I raised my arm to examine it. I thought it broke when I caught Sagat's punch. Looking at my bruised arm as if it had just been run over by a truck, Big D said, "What's wrong with you? Didn't you beat him before? Why let him bully you now?" Suppressing the pain in my arm, I told Big D, "Just imagine being gored by a rhinoceros, and you'll understand how I feel." But that's not all. He also has the souls of eagles and tigers in him. After hearing what I just said, Big D still doesn't seem to believe it. This is impossible. How can a body endure with so many souls in it? Did you get it wrong, Gregory? At this point, the Sagat man was in front of me, and I stood up and walked towards him. He didn't take the opportunity that I didn't have time to get up to attack me, from which he could tell that he wanted to play cat and mouse with me. Right now, he is using tiger martial arts to prepare to attack me. I also did not give up. I immediately performed the crane martial arts that the master taught. But completely beyond Sagat's imagination, I had no intention of attacking him. Just as Sagat was about to rush in, I kicked the shoe I was wearing towards him. While Sagat didn't understand what was going on, I continued to kick the other shoe towards him. Because he didn't know what I was planning, Sagat temporarily stood still in place. He just raised his hand to take the shoes, but his eyes continued to follow me. Actually, my purpose was to distract Sagat and retreat to the back. As soon as I stepped back, I pushed Big D forward and said, "Time to show off, Big D. Show him what suffering is. Remember not to go easy on him." Hearing what I just said, Big D just froze, unable to say anything. After a few seconds, Big D finally understood my intentions. While pulling out the gun in his body, Big D said, "Damn, I thought you could take out his hand, but unexpectedly, you had to rely on me. Open your eyes and watch me take him down." In the meantime, I bite the tip of my finger and draw a talisman with my blood. I say to Big D, "Try to hold him for a while, don't try to beat him, fighting won't work." Big D nodded at me as if he understood. Then he approached Sagat and shouted, "Damn albino, I'll let you go with your master today so he won't be lonely." While speaking, Big D continuously fired bullets at Sagat, but he was also extremely agile. Big D shot continuously but did not hit a single shot. Big D shot and stepped back to keep distance from Sagat but failed. His speed was so fast that Big D couldn't keep up. Sagat quickly approached Big D. First, he knocked the gun out of Big D's hand. Then a powerful kick sent Big D flying backward, hitting me. Showing great pain, Big D groaned, "Gregory, are you done? I can only hold out this far. Oh my God, it's painful." Holding Big D aside, I immediately rushed towards Sagat. In my hand right now is a talisman made with my own blood. I know that only it can knock the souls of those animals out of Sagat, Big D, and I don't expect to see the sun tomorrow if we can't do that.